And that's why the second part of my talk today is somewhat ironic, because the second chapter is a list of dogma, a list of doctrines, a list of ideas that Russell said were the 10 conservative principles. You know what? Here, why don't we just pass a few of these out. If you don't have a wall on which they'll go afterwards, please, but yeah, please, absolutely. Please, just leave them behind, and I'll get them on a wall someday. But let's just go through these here. The first of which, and you'll notice that it's not lower taxes, strong defense, and God is good, and keep government out of our business. So a lot of folks, particularly conservatives that are familiar with the talking head programs, they read these things for the first time and they say, what is this? What is this foreign language? It must be heresy. Kill him. But if you come to realize that what Russell's talking about here is truly the conceptual abstractions, the ideas that aren't necessarily Russell's, but rather are the ideas that he has culled from a long history. And that's the book, Conservative Mind, that came out in 1953, is essentially, it's a book about all of the great, what could be called conservative thinkers, from Burke, in the last edition, to Eliot. So, first of all, the conservative believes that there exists an enduring moral order. An enduring moral order. That God created this order for us. And we were created for it. That there are certain normative truths. That what is normatively true for a snake to crawl around on its belly is normal for a snake. But if a human tries to do that, that is not normative. That is out of the enduring moral order. Conservatives find respite in this by saying, well, there's an enduring moral order. Man and woman come together in marriage to have a family. That's part of the enduring moral order. Number two, the conservative adheres to custom, convention, and continuity. The 3 C's. What do we mean by this? Well, custom is what allows men to live together. We share certain customs. We share certain ways of living. Convention is really law at its base, is convention. We create these laws. We decide this is the type of community in which we want to live. Continuity. Perhaps the best way to point out what continuity is to show the inverse. The progressive thinks that social order is like an Etch-a-Sketch. In 1980, we just turn it over and start all over again. Whereas the conservative understands that what we have today, all of this great bequest, came because centuries of development of great thinkers. It's really a great inheritance. Number 3, conservatives believe in what may be called the principle of prescription. The best line is Henry's, that by prescription we mean the lamp of experience. That there are the conservative believes that there's probably not going to be too much invention done on the way a man is. There's not going to be too many more great discoveries about human nature. The poets have found most of them, and we'll continue to talk about them. But you don't need to believe in Greek gods to see the truth in Homer. Homer knew what human nature is. It hasn't changed. Conservatives are guided by their principle of prudence. In the book, when Russell mentions this, I cannot help but think of Henry Hazlitt's economic lesson. Has anybody heard of Henry Hazlitt? Economics in one lesson. Can anybody recite the lesson to me? The one lesson? Of course, go right ahead.
Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson, I may be paraphrasing you,
sure.
Saying, always think through all the effects of what you're going to do.
Exactly. That the art of economics isn't just by looking at how a particular policy will affect one group, but all groups. How a policy will affect all groups, and not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. Prudence, on the other hand, looks at all the different ways that it can affect someone and understands that often a policy has lots of unintended consequences. Very important distinction there. Variety. We pay attention to the principle of variety. What does that mean? Does that mean that we're in favor of multiculturalism, where we think that all cultures are equal or somehow equal value? No, the conservative understands that variety means that we're all different. It also means the idea of subsidiarity. Have you guys all heard this word before? Subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, the idea that it's better at the local level than at the state level, and better at the state than at the national. That if you're lean manufacturing, you go to the guy that's working on the line to figure out what's the best way to improve. That's the idea of variety. That the last thing we want is to have this social leveling done by the progressives that make us all the same. Variety is the spice of life. Conservative recognizes that. Conservatives are chastened by their principle of imperfectibility. There's a duality to man. We have capacity for good and evil. We have capacity for justice and mercy. There's never going to be a utopia on earth. It's not going to happen. There's no perfect social order. And so if we begin with that idea, then we understand that we can't just have some ideological pursuit that drives our policy. 7, persuaded that freedom and property are closely linked. Well, I don't reckon anybody's going to disagree with that. You probably all grasp that concept immediately. However, one of the things that Russell did his entire life was talked about how we can't just be economic man. That a conservative can't just be for lower taxes and for business. That's only teaching you how to be half a man. That there's another part to it. The other part is the transcendent part. Sure, property allows man the leisure time to read, to study, to really develop his children, to develop his business, to develop his way of life, to pursue happiness. The founders understood that it was the principal bedrock of our freedom and the way on which we were founded. Conservatives uphold voluntary community quite as they oppose involuntary collectivism. This probably makes a lot of sense to you, but when Russell talks about it, he really digs deeply into the concept of the little platoons and what his friend Robert Nisbet talked about when he talked about the intermediate associations of life. Church, family, town, the scout troop, our clubs. I saw Mr. Bowman show up. The unions. Although conservatives don't particularly like the current manifestations of unions, the original intent of unions is very conservative. It provides the little platoon in which the industrialized man can find a place of community where they can help him reach his full potential. Now, of course, today, all the unions are doing is teaching their members how to bite the hands that feed them. But the original intent is the little platoon. Before I completely run out of breath, because I'm trying to go 1,000,000 miles an hour, conservatives perceive the need for prudent restraints upon power and upon human passions. Perhaps one of the most life-changing, one of the most biggest epiphanies that Kirk and the authors to whom he introduced me made me realize that just as there is something in all of us that wants to emancipate ourselves from forms, from tradition, from custom and convention, there's also a desire for community, something natural for community, to be a part of a larger group. We are social animals. And if you doubt this, look at any teenager that gets a mohawk and then hangs out with a bunch of other teenagers that get mohawks. They want to be individualistic, but they want to be a part of a group. There's also the desire, and it's in many ways related, the emancipatory spirit of man, the one that wants to break out of bounds, is also possible with our external order of life, our countries. See, no matter how good of an order a constitution or a police force may be, one needs only to look at Detroit or Washington, D.C. to see that they have lots of laws, but it's a corrupt society. It's a bad society. So it is true with the individual, that if we are constantly always trying to expand, if we're always trying to break out of our forms, that ultimately what happens is man, and this is what's happened today with mass man, is they become this fragmented, obsessive, alienated specialist that thinks, therefore, like Richard Weaver would say, for 500 years each man has been their own priest and professor of ethics. and the result has been an anarchy of the soul. Whereas when you begin to start reading the great books of life, it almost seems as if they're all written by the same hand, moving towards an immovable center, that they're always finding the same truths. This is the great conversation. This is the great chain of being. And this is what Russell means when he talks about the need for prudent restraints, as opposed to us always flying out, always trying to be individualistic. Number 10, the thinking conservative understands that permanence and change must be reconciled and recognized in a vigorous society. Conservatives are not against all change. Conservatives believe that old and proven are better more often than not than new and untested. But stuff's always getting better. Science is always advancing. However, we need to make sure that our society defends what Russell's friend T.S. Eliot called the permanent things. Just as I said earlier about how Homer talked about so many things that were true in his time, 2,500 years ago, as they are today. There are some things that are permanent. However, we need to make sure that our society isn't wholly old, but it isn't wholly new. We don't want to use Etch-a-Sketch to change everything the way the mass man typically wants it, or the particular passions of the day, but rather what we want to have is a balance. We want to be true to what's always true, what's always right, our principles, but we don't want to be this uncompromising, unchanging type of people. Otherwise, we'll be the ones that will end up walking the plank. So thank you very much for your time.